Hi, today I'm going to cover Angular elements. So what are Angular elements? Well, Angular elements basically they make use of a new API developed for the web platform. Essentially, it's called custom elements. If you click on the link on the Angular page, it'll take you to the Mozilla developer page where it goes over the API's generic definition and usage. So in terms of Angular, what are Angular elements? Well, it basically allows you to convert an Angular component into a standard web HTML element so that you can use it, you can interact with these elements using just plain old regular JavaScript from outside the context of the Angular application itself. And there are several usages for this. One of them could be if you have a very old code base at your company that you're working at. For example, a full stack application that was using jQuery that you are unable to completely migrate over to Angular, and you kind of want to be able to like insert some Angular components using regular JavaScript. Well, this will allow you to kind of do that since it can interact very easily with these elements since they are registered in the browser as regular HTML elements. Of course, there are other ways to achieve such interaction, but this is just another tool in the toolbox, so to speak. So I also came across this concept of micro-frontends when I was on YouTube watching some of the NGConf videos. So I kind of honestly have mixed opinions about this. I think it seems a little bit forced. The idea behind it is kind of like how we have microservices in the back end. Some guy came up with the idea of micro front ends where it can be an application could be split up based on the objective of that team. So one team could be existing with the purpose of inspiring the audience. The other one could just focus on the search, making the search find the right product as easily as possible. Other teams can have different missions, and they each kind of develop their own application in whatever framework they want to use. One could use Angular, another team could use React, another team could use Vue.js, for example. And then by making use of this custom elements API, and in terms of Angular, by using the Angular Elements API, these various components could interact with each other agnostic of the framework that each individual team is working with. So just going on the Angular Elements page, it says here that in this orange part, that it's currently still being enhanced. So there's more features going to be added in to help with supporting other frameworks. But I'm going to go ahead and just show you what we can do today with it. Just a very basic introduction. I'll leave the further exploration to you guys, but I just wanted to help you guys get started with it. So let's go ahead and dig in. So to begin with, we're going to need an Angular application. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal and go onto my desktop and create a new Angular app using the Angular CLI. I'm going to go ahead and say no, I do not want routing, and CSS is fine for our purposes. So while that installs, I'm just going to go a little bit more into the front end, or the micro front end concept that I had mentioned earlier. So one of the reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical of this architecture is just that if you're starting a new app, I don't really see the benefit in splitting things up like this. At least, I mean, I see there could be benefit if like you have one team in like a certain country, another team in another country, or Certain teams have different skills, or they're more familiar with certain frameworks or something. But I honestly feel like if you're starting a new project from scratch, I feel it's just easier to manage the interaction through one singular app. However, this is kind of like an emerging concept. So as the tools develop and allow this to grow in ways that are still being conceptualized, I think it'll be interesting to see how this concept plays out, whether it's a fad, it dies and fizzles out, or whether it grows to be the thing that many people will be wanting uh, to go with from the very beginning. All right, so our Angular app is created. So now let's go ahead and open it up in WebStorm. Where's WebStorm? There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna click on open, go to my desktop, and what did I call the app? Elements. Yeah, elements. Right here. Okay, so let's open that up. Okay, so to begin, we're going to need to use the Angular CLI. I'm going to go to the website just so you guys can familiarize yourselves with where to find all this information. So if you scroll down a bit, it'll kind of show you somewhere. Maybe ng-add is the command we're going to be using. It's in here somewhere. It's just faster to search for it. Okay. So about halfway down through the page, they kind of put the command in a weird spot, honestly. But right before the example, they give you the command to add the polyfill to your project. So we use this command ng-add, add Angular elements, and then the name of the project. So I'm going to close this terminal and just use the terminal within within WebStorm from now on. So in Windows, it's Alt F12 to open up the terminal. All right, so let's run that command. So it's ng-add Angular elements, dash name equals, and then the name of our project, which is elements. Okay. So while working on this, I noticed there were a couple of bugs along the way. So I'll go ahead and show that to you, show them to you, and how I went about fixing them. All right, so that installed. So now let's open up our code in the source folder, the app folder. Let's actually generate a component, ng-generate component. Let's call it SomeElement. We're going to use that as and we're going to register this element as a native HTML element using the Elements API. All right, so we went ahead and created that component. And one thing you need to do is go to the app module, and we need to register this element or this component in the entry components array. I don't know what my WebStorm is doing. There we go. So if you ever don't know what one of these things does, you can always control click into it and read some of the JS documentation or the TS documentation for it. So basically, for components that are achieved via the router, you don't need to put them in here, but since we're going to be adding them dynamically without using the router, we have to add it into this array. Maybe in the future it'll be smart enough to recognize that, and we don't need to add them there, but for now we do. So that's that. All right, so let's continue and um, render this element. However, we're going to be rendering it dynamically, so to kind of illustrate that it can be done using regular, just straight up the window in JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever. So let's actually make a button that will add instances of this some element. So we're going to create a button here, and on click, we're going to say add some element to page, or just add some element for brevity. And in the component file, let's create that function. Add some element. And what that is going to do is we're going to let's not get there quite yet. First, let's define the custom element. So we're going to use the create custom element function, which is from the Angular elements library. So we're just basically going to register this in the window so that we can create instances of it using just straight up JavaScript. So as you can see, this function was imported from the Angular elements utility library. So we're going to create the custom element, and we're going to pass it the component that we just created, some element component, and we're going to pass it the injector. And we have to use dependency injection to inject the injector. And semicolon. Okay, so now that we have created this custom element, we need to register it on the window. So window.custom elements. Remember, this is the API that I showed you in Mozilla, on the Mozilla website. This is the custom elements API. It's on the window now. Well, at least in most browsers. If you scroll to the bottom, it should show you the compatibility. I think Microsoft Edge is the only one that doesn't really support it right now. Somewhere in here it shows you the browsers that are supporting it. But for now, I think it's just Edge that is still working on an implementation. Yeah. Anyways, we're going to register this custom element into the browser. So window.customelements.define. So you can, that's what's nice about TypeScript, is you can see all the functions available. So define, get, upgrade, and when defined. So we're going to use the define function, and we're going to register we're going to call it some element. That's going to be like the HTML tag that you're going to need to use. And we're going to pass it the reference to the object we just created. All right. Okay. So this was one of the rather annoying issues I had encountered while trying to figure this API out. I had this error, and also down here in the TypeScript tab, I had something about cannot read property command types of undefined or something. So what I did to solve that issue was, honestly, I think you might even be able to just ignore that. Let me just see if it compiles. We're going to do a quick experiment here. I think you might be able to ignore that one. I'm not 100% sure though. Let's see what happens. All right, so our server started up. Let me navigate to the... I'm going to close a couple of my browser tabs because I only have 4 gigabytes of RAM. So I can close that. Let's see if our app is even starting up. Okay, so we have a button. I forgot to put some text on the button, but see if there's any console errors. Seems to be working. Okay, so let's ignore this kind of IDE error for now. I had found that removing the, if it gives you an issue, one thing we can try to do is to remove the language services dependency. That seemed to solve it for me earlier when I tried on a Macintosh, but when I tried today, it seemed to work just fine if we ignored it. So let's go ahead and just ignore it for now and pretend that it's just a bug in that IDE or something for now. So let's give some text to that button in the HTML file for the app component. Let's say add custom element and go back to our browser. It's supposed to refresh. There we go. Okay. Okay, cool. So now back in the TypeScript file, we need to do something when we click on that button. So we already defined this custom element on the actual browser's window. So let's go ahead and add an instance of it, the custom element, to the page once that button is clicked. So let's say we have some HTML element. We're just going to use raw JavaScript to do this. You could use jQuery or whatever utility libraries that you want. So we just use this standard create element function, which is one of the very, very old functions for creating HTML elements via JavaScript. And the tag is some element that we defined in the constructor. So that's an instance of this HTML element. And now we're going to append it to the document's body. All right, let's go back to the browser and see if it's working so far. I guarantee you it's not going to work because of a bug. So I wanted to show you this instead of fixing it before starting, because there is an open bug here for Angular elements. And it might be fixed by the time that you're going to use it, but in case it's not, the fix is to pin down one of the dependencies versions. And as you can see right here, I mean, there's more than one fix. The fix that I'm using for right now is just to hard code this dependencies version to version 1.8.1. There's another fix where you could go into the tsconfig. Where'd it go? tsconfig.app.json. No, not that one. tsconfig.json. And change the target to ES 2015. This would be one workaround for that bug. Instead I'm going to leave that as it is, and instead I'm just going to go into the package.json file and go to that dependency and hard code it to 1.8.1. Save that, and I'm going to stop the server and npm install. All right, and then I'm going to start our server up again. So if we go back to, I'm going to close this tab now, and we go back to our HTML page and refresh. My server is still starting up. Okay, go back to the browser, refresh, and click the button, and now you can see that when we click it, it's appending these custom HTML elements in there, and these are actually Angular components. So because they're Angular components, we can take advantage of a lot of the features that Angular has to offer from within them, even though we're adding them to the window as regular HTML elements. So what exactly does that mean? Well, when I was just kind of looking at the API for the first time, I was kind of experimenting to see kind of like what are the limitations of this. I was wondering whether is it just like one element, like can I put a nested element in there? Well, actually, it turns out you can. You can pretty much do anything you can in an Angular app. Recently with Angular 7, they even added content projection. So I mean, it's pretty advanced. You can work with services so that your various Angular elements can communicate with each other. They can share data through the services. So even if they're kind of floating around throughout your page in some like old school like jQuery based page or some full stack whatever, they can kind of interact with each other based on the data that they're sharing. You can use data binding. You can register. You can have them emit regular HTML element events and listen to these events using jQuery or whatever JavaScript libraries you want to use. So let's just go ahead and showcase some of these features so that you believe me. So let's say we want to nest an element inside of some element. So in the terminal, let's create a component, ng generate component. Within the sum element folder, let's call it nested. Cool. All right. So in our sum element, let's go to the HTML page and nested components work as well. And let's go ahead and render out what the selector is for this. I think it's just going to be app-nested. Save that. Go back to our browser. See, as you can see, this is our custom element highlighted in orange, and it consists of an Angular component that contains another Angular component. So it's not just some very simple stuff. You can do complicated stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate data binding next. So to do that, let's go back to our app component. And I'm going to define just something simple to begin with. Let's have it take a number as an input. So in the sum elements component file, let's register an input of, let's call it, I don't know, CoolNumber. Let's say it's a number. Hit save. Okay. And in the HTML file, where should we put it? Let's just put it at the end. We'll render out CoolNumber. All right, so in the app component, we just need to declare that variable. What's called CoolNumber. So the element that the attribute name equals 7, for example. Unresolved variable. So I expected that. I just wanted to show you it so you can see why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just going to cast this to the any type for now. There are stronger ways to typecast it so that you can define all of the different attributes that exist on the HTML element. However, for brevity's purposes, I'm just going to typecast it to any so that we can declare whatever variables on it without having to explicitly set up like the interface or whatever is needed to say what attributes are available. So okay, so we registered that data there. So I hit save, go back to the browser. So yeah, I mean it's working. Why is it doing it on separate lines? I'm not entirely sure. Let me take another look at the HTML. Huh. Maybe because it's a paragraph tag. I don't know. Let's try changing it to a div instead. Oh well. Either way, the data is there. It's putting on separate lines. That's fine. The data is getting bound to the component. It's being passed in as 7, and it's being rendered out. All right. So that's cool. What if we wanted, what if the data changes over time? So, for example, let's go ahead and register. Let's go ahead and register an event listener on this element. So in jQuery, you would do the selector dot click or whatever, or dot on or whatever, or dot bind. But here we're just going to use straight up JavaScript. So on mouse over, we're going to invoke a function, and we're just gonna let's move this number out here. Some number equals 7. This dot some number, so that when we mouse over the HTML element, we can reset it to, or we can increment it or something. Some number plus plus. Okay, let's save that and take a look at what happens. So notice when I'm mousing over, nothing's happening. The reason for this is because in JavaScript, a number is primitive. So we passed this number in. However, once it gets incremented, the pointer is kind of like reassigned. So we could put it within an object and then just change the number within that object, or we could use observables. So either way it will work. Let's make this a new. Trying to think how complicated I want to make this. Yeah, let's make this a new behavior subject. If you don't know what behavior subjects and observables are, I have a video on that. It's the one about Angular state management with RxJS. So let's all right, so this is going to be a behavior subject of type number, and its initial value is going to be, I don't know, 7. And then, these are just naming conventions. And then I'm going to create this observable from from that behavior subject. I feel like I'm making this too complicated for people who just want to learn about Angular elements, who don't know about RxJS behavior subjects and such. So maybe I'm going to just use objects. Well, I encourage you to learn about RxJS and what it has to offer. So let's go ahead and start with this. I'll show you guys as an object in a second here as well. So anyways, we have this observable now. It's an object, which means that as we pass data through it, the pointer to this object will remain the same. So instead of incrementing that, we can just wrong button. And we're just going to increment the previous value by 1. And in our element, we now need to recognize that it's no longer a number, but rather it's an observable of type number. So that we need to import that, Alt Enter. And in the HTML file, since it's an observable, we would need to also use the async pipe. All right, so let's go to the web page, see if that's working. Something is not working. So why not? Oh, right here. We have the $, because we changed the variable name. Okay, so now as I mouse over the element, it's going to increment it by 1 at each time that event is thrown. So notice as I move the mouse over here, nothing happens, but once I move it over the component itself, which is defined as, let's take a look at it right here. Right here. So anytime I move my mouse over that highlighted region, it'll increase the value. So that's why when my mouse is over here, it was increasing. Okay, cool. So that was a little bit more advanced than I would have liked in terms of using outside concepts to convey something about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Git real quick. I'm going to git add everything, git commit, first commit for elements. I spelled commit wrong. Okay, so now I'm thinking of what I wanted to simplify it a bit for you guys. So yeah, I'll simplify real quick just in case I lost you there for a second. So instead of doing this, let's just use an attribute called SomeData equals this, and it has some number inside of it. And it's going to start with 7. And then once we mouse over the element, we're just going to increase the value by 1. All right, so in order for this Angular element or this component to have its input attribute update correctly, we need to be passing it an object, not just a number within the object directly. So let's go ahead and change this to accept the data object itself instead of just a primitive element, such as a number or a string. So this .SomeData, we're going to be passing it the object itself so that the component has reference to the pointer in memory where this object is stored, so that even if we're going to update this number within it, but it'll still have reference to where this overall object is located so that it can still find the updated number within there. So let's go ahead and go into the object itself now, or into the component itself, and update the attribute. Remember, we're passing it CoolData now, which is no longer an observable type number, it's an object. And we can be more specific by saying that it has an attribute called CoolNumber within there of type number. And in the HTML file, you need to replace the async pipe since we're not using an observable in this simplified example. And we're taking the CoolNumber attribute out of the CoolData object. So if we save that, make sure our server is running, and go ahead and go to the browser, refresh the page, fix the colors. Wrong button. Alright. So now when we click the Add Element button, we're still getting an error because it's not showing the number. Why is it not showing the number? Let's find out. So if you take a look at the SomeElement component, I noticed I said there was an attribute called CoolNumber, but it was actually defined as SomeNumber, not CoolNumber. So let's change it to what it's actually called, SomeNumber. Save that, go to the HTML, and those buttons are getting in the way. Change that to where the actual data is stored, SomeNumber. So save that, and then refresh the page, and still no luck. So one more step of debugging. And after a couple of seconds of debugging, I realized that my build hadn't finished building. So I just refreshed the page, and now it's working as it was before in the more complicated example using observables. However, I do like using the observables, so I'm going to go ahead and just do get reset and discard these simplified changes. However, where's the terminal? Get reset dash hard. And go back and see our changes. Yep. So now things are back how they were before. Okay. And this is the parent-child architecture, or the smart component presentation component, or smart component dump component, where the app component is the main smart component that has the data, and these child components are just rendering the data that's being passed to them. So you could also have services that have data that are being rendered through these Angular elements as well. So it's not limited to just simple situations. And the last thing I wanted to show you guys to help you guys get started with using Angular elements was how to register events on these custom HTML elements. So in order to do that, let's go back to our IDE, and let's go to the component and register an event emitter on it. Let's call it out. something. And choose it from the Angular core library. All right. So now let's create like a button, another button in here. With the text X. And when we click on that button, we're going to say remove custom element from the page. So remove custom element, and in the TypeScript file, let's make that function, remove custom element. And in order to do that, well, this function isn't actually going to do the removal. It's just going to emit a removal event. So let's say this dot out the event emitter dot emit or subscribe. I've also seen people use the next method around here, but I mean I don't really know the difference between emit and next, but they both seem to work, so let's use emit. And we can also pass data to these so that whoever listens to the events can get some payload. So let's just type something in there for fun. And so now when they click the button, we're going to be emitting an event. And with the use of the Angular Elements API in our app component, we can actually listen to that event. Actually, anywhere in the page we can listen to that event. As long as we have that element selected, we can register an event listener, just like we registered it on any other arbitrary event as relative to that given element. So we can register another event listener. This time it's a custom event. So it the event name is whatever you label the output, or whatever you label your event emitter. So in my case, I labeled it out something. So the event name is going to be out something in our case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first console.log the data that comes through. So let's listen for that data. This is what our custom events data looks like. Oh, and I have single quotes within single quotes. So let's use template literal instead. And then we'll just pass it the data object that came through. And after that, let's remove the element. So remember, this element is registered on the window, so we just gotta, well, we could say window.document, but it's implicit. Remove child, and then some HTML element. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that out. So I go ahead and click the button. As I hover over it, it increases the counter. And if I click on the X button, let me add one more. Okay, so we got 3 of them. Now if I click on the X button here, it should remove it and it should log out the data relevant to the custom event. Cool. So now we only have 2 of them. And here we can take a look at the data that's coming through this custom event. And here in the detail attribute, we get the data that was passed through. So whoever's listening to these custom events can get payloads. So for example, if you need to listen for this event in your like legacy jQuery page, you could do the jQuery selector dot on and then say the event name, which in our case was on something, and then you could handle Angular these Angular events through your jQuery code just as easily as I showed you. So yeah, it really helps you interact with different frameworks, in between different frameworks, because in the end, everything gets converted to a native HTML element and uses this standard API that is documented nicely on Mozilla's website. And it allows you to pass data into it as well. So yeah, that's all I wanted to show you is a brief introduction to Angular Elements. I'm very curious to see how you going to be using it, or if you have any brilliant ideas about how to best utilize these capabilities of this new API. And please go ahead and leave comments about how you or suggestions you have to help improve what I covered and things that I might have done wrong that you think that you could do better. Please go ahead and share with the viewers in the comment section about ways to improve or cool features that you think I didn't cover but would like other people to know about. And if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and stay tuned. I'm interested to learn what features are going to be coming as they make further improvements. They say you can watch a video about the direction of development, but yeah, I mean it's a very new API. Microsoft Edge is still working on an implementation for it, so if you need to support Microsoft Edge, good luck with that. You might need to look into some polyfills that might not exist for Edge, or some old versions of like Internet Explorer or something. But other than that, it shows some good promise um, for the whole working between different frameworks and compartmentalizing different parts of your application so that various teams can just be responsible for a certain component, and then another team could like integrate them together if you really would want to architecture your app like that. Or yeah, I mean there's tons of uses for it. Yeah, I'll leave your creativity to determining how would be best for you to utilize it, if at all. Yeah, that's all. Have a good day.